Hello everyone, how's it going? So in this video I wanted to show you how microphotography works in Blender. So our main focus would not be modeling per se. However, we'll be focusing on setting up the general lighting, the camera setup, which is extremely crucial, the composition, and some lighting as well as the general mode of the image. As always, I will link down below every necessary asset and give some free alternatives. This is beginner friendly, so follow along. As you can see, I'm starting with a base model of a trunk and a twig from Megascans. I have used the 4K maps for each of those. However, you can download some free ones if you don't have access to Megascans. They come from either Blender Kit or Sketchfab, or there are plenty of other free amazing tools. It doesn't matter as much as they are good quality. Regardless, we'll be most likely hiding much of it using DOF. So make sure that the material from Megascans is set up correctly. Make sure that the clear coat is 0 and add your displacement. We need the extra details, believe me, we do. Now, the twig needs to have the most details, precisely, since it's where our main insect will be sitting on. As I mentioned earlier, it's a microphotography tutorial. Add the displacement. I like to add it in the modifier, the real geometry that we can see in the viewport, right? For the simple fact that it gives me more control. Make sure to set the scale correct, add the correct displacement maps, and make sure that the coordinates are set to UV and adjust the strength until it looks like it should, right? So the more geometry you give it, the more subdivision, the better it will look. Don't worry, geometry doesn't add much to the render times as the maps do. So you could set up the factor to be 4 in the render, and in the viewport leave it at 1 or just hide it, right? So now at this point it's very important to play around with the camera, look for a good composition, right? So the twig and the trunk don't work perfectly at this point. I will be color grading it any minute. But all around, just try to get a nice composition. Add a camera and do align or fit camera to view. In this case, make sure to use the focal length of 120 upwards. This is extremely crucial. As I mentioned, this is microphotography. Photographers use very focused lenses to photograph small objects, so usually 105 up to even more. Now, as you could see, I'm starting to add our twig. Its color is very different. I know that the resolution is way too different, but I will fix it. I promise you it will look perfectly okay in this case. So make sure to be making use of the compositional guides in the camera section, as you could see in front of you, and play around. I would like to have the insect in the lower third, right, in the intersection of the lower third, and at this point it's time to calibrate the material of the trunk with that of the twig. Add some saturation, play with the hue and with the value as well, so just make it make sense and go together, right? So I'm trying to do this just as a sake of workflow proof, so you can get the idea. Now, the lighting for this one is used in HDRI. I usually don't use HDRI for my project inside of Blender specifically, but in this case I will use this one, which I will link down below. You could use any one that you would want to go ahead and use. I usually don't use these for anything other than this exact my photography scenario, or maybe some product lighting. But in this case, it will give us some really nice bokeh effect. So make sure to set up the transparent light paths way higher, since we'll be using some leaves in a minute, and add 1 to the volume. Play around with the Z rotation until you get something that you like. Be mindful of how it might look with the depth of field on, so try to find some slightly bigger values in the HDRI. Now import our model, which I will link down below as well. It's of a insect. Import it as OBJ, right? So go ahead and do that. It comes with a texture, which is, I believe, 8K, so plenty of resolution. Go ahead and add it. Set the material correctly. Give it some slight specular and make the roughness a bit low to emulate the effect of wetness that you would see. Now in my case, I added some subsurface in my image that I have shared in the thumbnail and I have shown in the rest of the video. I did go ahead and detail this quite a bit. So I changed with the modeling a slight bit. I added some particle layers, right, to make it look more interesting. Now play around with the subsurface, make sure that it's set up in a good way, because it is specifically reliant on the size of your object. Now when I will scale it down, it will look very candle-ish, if that makes any sense, so like a candle. Add the exact same map to the bump node. It will give us a slight bit of details. Now you could go ahead and add a particle system, you know, some fuzz, some maybe droplets of wetness, and position it where it makes sense. You know, there isn't really a way to do this directly, right? Or there could be, but you know, you would waste too much time. So do it just by hand. It gives you a lot more control. Go ahead and play if you want the free rotation plus R2 times. And this is the reason why I like to have the displacement in the geometry, so I can see it in the viewport using the modifier. So I can fine tune the setup of the insect, as you can see in front of you now. Feel free to play around with the editing, proportional editing, and as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, the subsurface scattering is way too high, so make it very, very low. As you can see in front of you now, it looks a bit more interesting. You know, we could go probably lower. Now this looks almost perfect. Once you add hair, better lighting, some post-production, it will look perfect. I mean, after all, the image is like 8K and it only takes up like 200 pixels of our image. Now play around with the focal length. Make sure to be very mindful of the composition, as you could see. Now this image might be slightly different from the one that I have made, for the simple fact that I did play around with a different composition. Now this is the most important part, DOF. Now Blender emulates this with a very good and realistic way, so you don't have to do much. 2.8, 1.8 is already really good point to start with. As you could see, we already have a very nice sense of scale. Now this needs a bit of details, doesn't it? Add a tree. It can be any tree, the quality doesn't really matter, right? You can just scatter some bunch of leaves inside of a cube as volumes and it will look okay. Now as you can see, here's the difference before and after. Adds a lot more depth, especially when we will add the lighting. Now add one in front of the camera. We will be adding a sunlight in a minute, and also make use of the nice bouquet that we have going on right now. You know, feel free to rotate, maybe just add a single leaf in front of the camera, right? So this looks very interesting. Now add a sun. We want some lighting that will be shed exactly on our insect. Hence, the trees that we added will give us a lot more control. Now what I like to do is give the color a red color so I can see what I'm doing well, especially in these cases. Now rotate this as if it's around like 2 p.m., 3 p.m., right? I mean, unless you're, you know, from somewhere around the North Pole or something. But usually, to this extent, it looks okay. Now, as you can see in front of you, the red color helps me visualize this way better. At this point, I can get it back to normal, you know, 4,500 degrees Kelvin, of course. And, you know, just play around with the strength in general, play around with the color, play around with the scale or angle, right? So the bigger the angle is, you know, or if you use in Maya or Corona or Viri or something, it's called scale. The less harsh, the softer the shadows will be. Now in this case, I want some very harsh shadows. Also, make sure to be using AGX, if you like it, of course. It gave a slight reddish tint. However, I will be making use of that in post-production. I probably won't be showing you post-production in this video, I have a very nice video coming along about post-production using DaVinci Resolve. It's a tool that I have been using recently, and it's amazing, to say the least. Now, the difference between my image that I have shared earlier and the one that you see in front of you at this moment is that I have used two different things. The first thing is I added some droplets, right? The second thing is the composition alone, but mostly I will also add a volume setup, but that's not very important. You can see in front of you while I talk about the important thing. I have added a slightly different bokeh effect, using a very simple setup, which I can show you in the future. But like I have an anisotropic texture in front of the camera, which kind of emulates the effect of a lens with some imperfections. So it gives me built-in vignette and some scratches, and it makes the bokeh have very nice shapes. You can Google this and you will find results. However, I will be making a tutorial, hopefully, if I come around this. And in terms of the post-production, I don't do it in Blender, and you shouldn't do it in Blender, like using the curves. Why would you? I got the red a bit lower and pushing the green and the blues slightly. My main post-production was done in DaVinci Resolve. I will be doing a tutorial, hopefully next week or the one after it, depending on my schedule. As you can see, the video was made like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. But at this point, I find it very, very impressive in terms of the power of Blender, right? So I just made a great render, in like 20 minutes. The one that I have shown you earlier took me like 40 minutes, roughly. Most of which were done adding the particle system for the insect. And some slight post-production. I'm not really good at post-production. There are many people better than me. However, I get the job done, especially when doing CGI, right? So the render engine does a really good job in giving us some very, very nice images with not too imperfections, but this can be a weakness. We need imperfections, which is what I will also talk about in the next video. Now, hopefully learn something here. We have a very nice render here. And, feel free to comment down below, subscribe, and enjoy yourself. Until next time, take care. Bye.